Chapter 22 Three Daughters of One Race Part 1 If the years did not exactly whirl past after you were 12, as the maiden aunt had so dolefully predicted, they really did seem to go faster. Pat and Bets could hardly believe that their 13th birthday was so near when Mother told them Pat and Joan and Dorothy were coming over from St. John for a visit, and it would be nice to have a little party for them. "You can have it on your birthday. That is Bets's birthday, too, and you will kill 3 birds with 1 stone," said Mother gaily. Pat was not very keen about parties, not as keen as Judy would have liked her to be. Neither was she especially excited over the visit of Joan and Dorothy Selby, although she was rather curious. She had heard a good deal at one time or another about the beauty of Dorothy. Both Joan and Dorothy had had their pictures in a society paper as the lovely little daughters of Mr. and Mrs. Albert Selby of Linden Lodge. One would just like to see for oneself if Dorothy were as pretty as family gossip reported. "I don't believe she's a bit prettier than Winnie." "Oh, 'tis likely not, if Winnie was dressed up like her, sure, and it's sometimes the fine feathers that make the fine birds. But your Uncle Albert was the fine-looking boy, and they say Dorothy takes after him. He's never been home much. He got a gay young wife that thought things dull here." "Joan and Dorothy are being educated at a convent boarding school," said Pat. "I suppose they'll be frightfully clever." Judy sniffed. Oh, cleverness can't be put in with a spoon even at your convents. We do behave in some brains at Silverbush. Don't let them overcrow you, Pat, with their fine city ways and convent breeding. Howsomever, I expect they're nice little girls, and seeing as they're your only cousins on the Spindle side, I'm hoping you'll take to them." Joan and Dorothy had not been at Silverbush 24 hours before Pat had secretly made up her mind that she was not going to take to them. Perhaps, although she would never have owned it, she was a little jealous of Dorothy, who certainly lived up to her reputation for beauty. She was prettier than Winnie, though Pat never could be got to admit that she was prettier than Bets. Her hair was a dark, nutty brown, dipping down prettily over her forehead, and it made Pat's look even more gingery and faded by contrast. She had velvety brown eyes that made Pat's amber-hued ones look almost yellow. She had beautiful hands, which she put up to her face very often and which made everybody else's look sunburnt and skinny. Joan, who was the brainy one, and made no great claims to beauty, was very proud of Dorothy's looks and bragged a little about them. "Dorothy is the prettiest girl in St. John," she told Pat. "She is very pretty," admitted Pat. "Almost as pretty as Winnie and Bets Wilcox." "Oh, Winnie!" Joan looked amused. "Winnie is quite nice looking, of course. You would be, too, if your hair wasn't so long and terribly straight. It's so Victorian." Probably Joan hadn't any very clear idea what Victorian meant, but had heard somebody say it and thought it would impress this rather independent country cousin. "Judy doesn't want me to bob my hair," said Pat coldly. "Judy? Oh, that quaint old servant of yours. Do you really let her run you like that?" "Judy isn't a servant," cried Pat hotly. "Not a servant? What is she, then?" "She is one of the family." "Don't you pay her wages?" Pat had really never thought about it. I suppose so." "She is a servant, then. Of course it's awfully sweet of you to love her as you do, but Mother says it doesn't do to make too much of servants. It makes them forget their place. Judy isn't very respectful, I notice, but of course it's different in the country. Oh, look at Dorothy over there by the lilies. Doesn't she look like an angel?" Pat permitted herself an impertinence. "I've heard that pretty girls hardly ever make pretty women. Do you think it's true, Joan?" "Mother was a very pretty girl, and she's a pretty woman. Mother was a Charlottetown Hilton, said Joan loftily. Pat knew nothing about Charlottetown Hiltons, but she understood Joan was putting on airs, as Judy would say. This was when they had been several days at Silverbush. They had been very polite the first day. Silverbush was such a charming spot. The garden was so quaint. The well was so quaint. The church barn was so quaint. The graveyard was priceless. What was the matter? Pat knew in a flash. They were patronizing the garden and the well and the barn and the graveyard. You drink water out of a tap, I suppose, she said scornfully. Oh, you are the funniest, darling, said Dorothy, hugging her. But after, they did not condescend quite so much. They had all seized each other up and formed opinions that would last for some time. Pat liked Dorothy well enough, but Joan was a blow. I wish you could see our mums, she said when Pat showed her the garden. Dad always takes all the prizes at the horticultural show with them. Why doesn't Uncle Alec cut that old spruce down? It shades the corner too much. That tree is a friend of the family, said Pat. I wouldn't have violets in that corner, suggested Dorothy. I'd have them over at the west side. But the violets have always been in that corner, said Pat. How this gate creaks, said Joan with a shudder. Why don't you oil it? It has always creaked, said Pat. Your garden is quaint, but rather jungly. It ought to be cleared out, said Dorothy as they left it. Pat had learned a few things since the day she had slapped Norma. For the honor of Silverbush no guest must be insulted. Otherwise there is no knowing what she might have done to Dorothy. It was just as bad inside the house. Joan was all for changing the furniture about if it had been her house. Do you know what I'd do? I'd put the piano in that corner. But it belongs in this corner, said Pat. The room would look so much better, darling, if you just change it a little, said Joan. The room would hate you if you changed it, cried Pat. Joan and Dorothy exchanged amused glances behind her back, and Pat knew they did, but she forgave them because they praised Bets. Bets, they said, was lovely, with such sweet ways. Oh, she has the good heart. Of course she has the good manners, said Judy. Pat warmed to Joan when Joan admired the birdhouse Jingle had given her. Jingle had a knack of making delightful birdhouses, but when the girls met Jingle, Joan lost grace again. Dorothy was sweet to him, perhaps a little too sweet, but Joan saw only the badly cut hair and the nondescript clothes. And Dorothy enraged Pat by saying afterwards, "It's awfully sweet of you to be nice to that poor boy." Patronizing! That was the word for it. She had patronized Jingle, too, and yet Jingle liked to hear Dorothy play on the piano. It couldn't be denied she could do it. Winnie's performance was nothing beside hers. Both the Selby girls were musical. Joan practiced night and day on her guitar, and Dorothy showed off her pretty little paws on the piano. "You'd be thinking she meant to tear the keys out by the roots," muttered Judy, who did not like to see Winnie so eclipsed. Part 2. So the visit was not a great success, although the older folk, all but Judy, thought the girls got on beautifully. Pat found it a bit hard to keep Joan and Dorothy amused, and they had to be amused all the time. They could not hunt their fun for themselves as she and Bets could. Pat showed them the graveyard, and introduced them to all the fields by name, to the old part, and the Whispering Lane. She even tried not to mind when Sid took Dorothy back and showed her the secret field, but it did hurt horribly. She knew the family thought Sid was sweet on Dorothy. Perhaps that was better than being sweet on May Binney, But Pat did not want Sid to be sweet on anybody. "You're just jealous of Dorothy because Cuddles has taken such a fancy to her," jeered Sid. I'm not," cried Pat. "Only that was our secret." "We're getting too big to have secret fields and all that nonsense," said Sid in a grown-up manner. "I hate growing up," sobbed Pat. "Oh, Sid, I don't mind you liking Dorothy. I'm glad you like her, but she didn't care about that field." "No, she didn't," admitted Sid. "She said, what on earth did we see in it to make a secret of? And what did we see, Pat, if it comes to that?" "Oh!" Pat felt helpless. If Sid couldn't see what they had seen, he couldn't be made to. Joan and Dorothy did not care for the playhouse in the birch bush. They did not care for hunting kittens in the barn. Two fluffy-tailed orange ones left them cold, although Dorothy did distracting things with them when any boys were around. She cuddled them under her lovely chin and even kissed the sun-warmed tops of their round, velvety heads. Just, as Judy muttered to herself, to be making the boys wish they were kittens. They knew nothing about pretending adventures. They did not like fishing in Jordan with long fat worms. They could not sit for hours on a fence or boulder or apple tree bough and talk over the things they saw as Pat and Bets could. They found nothing delightful in sitting on Weeping Willie's tombstone and looking for the first star. Joe took them driving in the evenings, and the party was a bit of excitement. They wore dresses the like of which had never been seen in North Glen before, and were remembered for years by the girls who saw them. But they were bored, though they tried politely to hide it. One thing they did like, however, sitting in the kitchen or on the back doorsteps in the September twilights, when the sky was all full of a soft brightness of a sun that had dropped behind the dark hills, and the birchen boughs in the big bush waved as if tossing kisses to the world. Listening to Judy's stories while they ate red, nut-sweet apples. It was the one time when Pat and her cousins really liked each other. Nor, though Dorothy thought it so quaint to eat in the kitchen, did they despise Judy's little bites after the storytelling. Pat caught them exchanging amused glances over Judy's fried eggs and codfish cakes, but they praised her bishop's bread and doughnuts so warmly that Judy's heart softened to them a bit. Judy felt rather self-reproachful because she did not like these girls better herself after having been so anxious that Pat should like them. Gentleman Tom, who had never noticed anyone but Judy, seemed to take a fancy to Joan and followed her about. Pat thought Judy would be jealous, but not a bit of it, apparently. "He knows she needs watching, that one," sniffed Judy. "It is nicer here in summer," admitted Joan on one of these evenings, "but it must be frightfully dull in winter." "It isn't. Winter here is lovely. One can be so cozy in winter," retorted Pat. "You haven't even a furnace," said Joan. "How in the world do you keep from freezing to death?" "We've stoves in every room," said Pat proudly, "and heaps of good firework. Look at the pile over there. We can see our fires. We don't have to sit up to a hole in the floor to get warm." Joan laughed. "We have steam radiators, silly, and open fireplaces. You are funny, Pat. You're so touchy about Silverbush. One would think you thought it was the only place in the world." "It is, for me," said Pat. "Joe doesn't think so," said Joan. "I've had talks with Joe when we were out driving. He isn't contented here, Pat." Pat stared. "Did Joe tell you that?" "Oh, not in so many words, but I could see. I don't think any of you here really understand Joe. He doesn't like farming. He wants to be a sailor. Joe is a boy with very deep feelings, Pat, but he doesn't like showing them." The idea of her explaining Joe to me, sobbed Pat to Judy after the girls had gone to their bed in the poet's room. I know Joe has some silly ideas about sailing just as well as she does, but father says he'll soon have more sense. I'm sure Joe would never want to go away from Silverbush. You can't all be staying here forever, darling, warned Judy. But we needn't think of that for years yet, Judy. Joe is only 19, and Joan to be putting on airs about understanding him. Oh, that's where the shoe pinches, chuckled Judy. And Joan asked me today if I didn't think Dorothy had a lovely laugh. She said Dorothy was noted for her laugh. I agreed just to be polite, Judy. Oh, if one hadn't to be polite, but then one has. But I don't think Dorothy's laugh is half as pretty as Winnie's, Judy. Sure, and they've both got the Selby laugh, and you can't be telling which of them is laughing if you don't see her. But I'm knowing neither ye nor Joan could be convinced of that. The trouble is, me jewel, that ye and Joan are a bit too much alike in a good many things ever to be hitting it off very well. Pat did not tell Judy everything that had stung her. Joan had said, "After all, that Jingle of yours has a lovely smile." "He's not my Jingle," said Pat shortly. And what difference did it make to Joan whether Jingle had a lovely smile or not? Hadn't she made fun of his hair and his glasses and his frayed trousers? And she had also laughed at Uncle Tom's beard and Judy's book of useful knowledge. One was Victorian, and the other was outmoded. They condescended to Aunt Edith, and Aunt Barbara, too. They were such quaint old darlings. Pat had never been so conscious of the leak stain in the dining room ceiling and the worn places in the little parlor carpet until she saw Joan looking at them. And she had not noticed how mossy the shingles of the kitchen roof were growing until Joan said amiably that she rather liked old houses. Our house is really rather too new. It's of white stucco with a red-tiled roof, a bit glaring. Father said it will mellow with time. I never like new houses, said Pat. They haven't any ghosts. Ghosts? But you don't believe in ghosts, do you, Pat? I didn't mean ghosts exactly. What did you mean then? Oh, just that. When a house has been lived in for years and years, something of the people who lived there stays in it. You quaint darling, said Dorothy. Part 3. Pat exulted in the freedom and silence of home after they had gone. It was altogether delightful to be alone again. The books that had been strewn everywhere were back in their places. The poet's room was no longer cluttered up with alien dresses and shoes and brushes and necklaces. Isn't it just nice to be here by ourselves and no outsiders? She said to Judy as they sat on the steps. A night of dim silver was brooding over the bush and the pale. Perfect gold of the trembling aspen leaves had faded into shadow. The still air was full of far, muted surf thunder. Gentleman Tom had arranged himself beautifully on the well platform, and the two orange kittens were blinking their jewel eyes and purring their small hearts out on Pat's lap. Mother says she is so sorry I didn't love my cousins. I do love them, Judy, but I don't like them. Oh, but there is a crowd, said Judy. Two girls can be getting on very well, but when there's three of you, and all high steppers, someone's bound to get rubbed the wrong way. Often I have been seeing it. I liked Joan in spots, but she made me feel unimportant, Judy. She snubbed me. Sure, and she snubbed the moon, that one, but she's the clever one for all. And she bragged. She did. The Hiltons always did be liking to make a bit of a splash, and didn't you do a bit of snubbing and bragging now yourself, Patsy darling? Though I'm not saying you didn't be having the aggravation. There don't be many families that haven't their own little kinks, even the Selbys now, never to mention the Gardiners. You have to be making allowances. I'm thinking you'd have been liking the girls better if it wasn't for your little jealousy, Patsy. I wasn't jealous, Judy. Oh, be honest now, me jewel. You was jealous of Joan because Joe liked her, and you was jealous of Dorothy because Sid and Cuddles liked her. You have your little faults, Patsy, just as they have. I don't tell fibs anyway. They told mother they had a perfectly lovely time. They hadn't. That was a lie, Judy. Oh, a polite lie, maybe, and maybe not a lie at all. They had it in spots, as you say, I'm thinking. Anyway, there's one word I never want to hear again as long as I live, Judy, and that's quaint. Quaint, is it? Sure, when Joan called Gentleman Tom quaint, I'll be swearing the baste winked at me. I could have been telling Miss Joan her own grandfather was quaint the night he got up to be making a splash at Tory meeting and his wife, who was born Tolman, and be the same token a grit. Landed over from his state behind and pulled him down by his coat tails. You could hear a thud all over the hill. Not a word would she let him be saying. Oh, quaint. Sometimes, Judy, they made me awful mad. Inside. But you kept it inside. That shows you're getting on. It's what we all have to be learning, me jewel, if we want to be living with folks paceable. Mad inside, is it? Sure, and I was mad inside every day that they was here when they began showing off in me own kitchen. And that Joan one talked about caping abreast of the times. Sure, thinks I to myself, if chasing around in circles after your own tail is keeping up with the times, you're the lady that can be doing it. And then I would be thinking that your aunts at the Bayshore were just the same when they were little girls, and thinks I, families must be standing by each other, and life will be curing us all of a lot of foolishness. I wouldn't wonder if you'd be meeting the girls some time again when you've all got a bit riper and finding you like them very well. Pat received this prediction in skeptical silence. She looked up to the long house where the light in Betsy's window was glowing like a friendly star on a dark hill. Anyway, I'm glad Bets and I can be alone again. Bets is the only girl I want for a friend. What will you be doing when she grows up and goes away? Oh, but she never will, Judy. Even if she gets married, she will go on living at the Long House because she is the only child. And I'll always be here, and we'll always be together. We have it all arranged. Judy sighed and nudged. Don't be after saying them things out loud, Patsy. Not out loud, darling. Sure, and you never can tell who might be listening to you.